My name is Carol DaRonch, and I was just 18 years old when I survived an attack by one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history, Ted Bundy. It's a day I'll never forget, and a story that still feels unreal to me. On November 8th, 1974, after finishing work, I decided to drive to Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. Normally, my older sister would drive me around town, but I had recently gotten my own car, a 1974 maroon Camaro with a black top. I was so proud of that car. I thought it was beautiful. While I was browsing in a bookstore inside the mall, a man approached me. He introduced himself as Officer Roseland and told me that someone had been caught trying to break into my car in the mall parking lot. It sounded alarming, but he read my license plate number back to me, and I confirmed that it was indeed my Camaro. Even though he wasn't in a police uniform, I didn't doubt him at first. He asked if I would follow him back to the parking lot to check if anything was stolen from my car. Wanting to be helpful, I agreed. When we got to the parking lot, I looked over my car and saw that nothing seemed to be missing. Then, Officer Roseland suggested we go to the police station because they were holding the person who tried to break into my car. This is when I started to feel uneasy. I thought I could smell alcohol on him, which made me suspicious. Sensing my hesitation, he quickly pulled out a wallet and showed me a police badge. That reassured me. I thought, oh, okay, he really is a police officer. Even though it seemed odd that he didn't have a police car and was driving a Volkswagen Beetle, I convinced myself he must be off-duty or undercover. I wanted to be nice, to do the right thing, and to be helpful. He was an authority figure after all. 3 weeks earlier, another young woman, Melissa Smith, had been kidnapped from the same mall. She was the daughter of the Midvale police chief, and her body was found on October 27, 1974. I had no idea at the time that the man standing next to me, pretending to be Officer Roseland, was actually Ted Bundy, a 27-year-old serial killer who had already murdered at least 11 women before targeting me. Believing Bundy was a trustworthy person, I got into his Volkswagen. He drove us away from the mall, planning to make me his next victim. In his Volkswagen Beetle, Bundy drove me through town for a short while. He told me to put on a seatbelt, but I refused. He suddenly turned down a side street and jumped the curb next to an elementary school. Having grown up in Murray, I knew we were nowhere near the police station. At this moment, I realized the man was not who he said he was. I remember screaming at him, "What are you doing? This isn't the police station. What are you doing?" And he wasn't saying anything. He wasn't answering me, and I could tell he just changed. Bundy grabbed my arm and quickly locked a handcuff onto one of my wrists, but I fought him off and prevented him from cuffing my other arm. He then pulled out a gun and threatened to shoot me in the head. I had never been so frightened in my entire life. And I know this is cliché, but my whole life went before my eyes. In those terrifying moments, I knew I had a choice to make: fight back or let this man do what he wanted in hopes that he would let me live. I think back then you were told not to fight off your attacker. If you were being raped, if you tried to fight him off, it'd make him mad, just to, let it happen. But I thought about my parents while I sat trapped in Bundy's car, and the pain they'd experience when their daughter never returned home. I remember thinking, my parents are never going to know what happened to me. I might have never been found. That was my feeling to fight. And I just had to get away with all my strength. So I fought back. Because I never put on a seatbelt, I opened the passenger side door and allowed myself to tumble onto the street. Bundy came after me, now with a crowbar in his hand. I remember feeling a crowbar in his hand. He was trying to hit me over the head with it. And struggling for a while, and then a car came along. The oncoming car's passengers, Wilbur and Mary Walsh, could not believe what they were witnessing in the street. They stopped their car and I ran over, threw open a door, and jumped inside. They drove away, leaving Bundy standing alone by his Volkswagen. I was safe, even as Bundy's handcuffs still dangled from one of my wrists. I really don't know how I got away. I was so small, and I just think I had this strength that just came from somewhere to get away from him. I got away, but so did Ted Bundy. And he killed a different teenage girl that night. After I escaped, Bundy went on to kidnap and kill 17-year-old Deborah Jean Kent later in the same evening. Kent was watching a high school play with her parents when she left at intermission to pick up her younger brother from an ice skating rink. She was never seen again. Her remains were eventually found in Fruit Heights, Utah, in 2015. When I heard that Kent's disappearance occurred the same night of my attack, I knew the culprit was my kidnapper. I went to my local police station and informed the authorities of my kidnapping. By the time of my attack, Utah police were already looking for several teens and young women who had disappeared in the autumn of 1974. They suspected my kidnapper was the same man who had killed others, and they weren't the only authorities looking for a serial killer. In Washington state, Seattle police were investigating the disappearances of 7 different young women, mostly college students, who had gone missing throughout the year. Those victims were kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered by Ted Bundy as well, but it would be another year before his arrest in my kidnapping. On August 16, 1975, Ted Bundy was pulled over in his Volkswagen by Utah Highway Patrol. The officer discovered his murder kit in the trunk. It contained a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, an ice pick, and other suspicious items. The officer arrested Bundy after making the discovery. The following month, I picked Bundy out of a lineup and he was charged in my abduction. A trial date was set, and I prepared myself to testify against Bundy. On February 23, 1976, the trial began in Salt Lake City. As Bundy sat across from me in the courtroom, I identified him as my kidnapper. I remember the expression on his face while I sat on the witness stand. Bundy sat there with a smirk on his face, always really arrogant, kind of laughing when I answered the questions. I faced many questions from his defense lawyers who sought to poke holes in my story and convince me that Bundy was not my attacker. I remember being on the witness stand for hours, being questioned by his attorneys, trying to say that I didn't have the right man, of course. And how did I know that he was the right man? That I was mistaken. One of Bundy's attorneys, Bruce Lubeck, was particularly aggressive in his convictions that his client was innocent. During a 1976 television interview, Lubeck questioned my story. "You know, we have our theories as to how it happened and why she did make an identification," Lubeck said. "But I don't conclude that it was because she got a good look at her abductor and was able to remember him. I don't think that happened." In fact, even after Bundy was convicted for multiple murders and executed in January 1989, Lubeck still held on to his belief that Bundy was innocent in my kidnapping. Now an assistant U.S. attorney, he said in a 1989 interview with Deseret News that Bundy shouldn't have been found guilty in the DaRonch case. In 2001, Lubeck was appointed a U.S. district judge in Utah and continued in that role for 16 years. One of his most famous cases occurred in 2017 when he denied a transgender boy's request to change his birth certificate. Lubeck called the request akin to someone asking to change their name to Hitler. But in spite of Lubeck's best efforts, Ted Bundy was found guilty of aggravated kidnapping in my case. Surviving that attack was a turning point in my life. I went on to testify against Ted Bundy in court, helping to secure his conviction for kidnapping and later for the murders of other victims. Being one of his few known survivors, I played a crucial role in bringing justice to the many women he harmed. My story is a reminder of the importance of trusting your instincts and the strength you can find within yourself in the most desperate situations. Today, I live with my partner Michael, near the same area where I was abducted in Utah. After surviving Bundy's kidnapping and attack, I learned how to detach myself from the experience and move forward with my life. After high school, I went to college and earned a degree in business management. Though hesitant at first, I agreed to participate in the Netflix series Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, after my adult son convinced me to share my story again. Today, I remain active in the true crime space on social media. On my Facebook page, I share articles about serial killers and their victims, including stories about Ted Bundy and my case against him. Before we dive into the second story, I want to take a moment to thank you all for watching. If you're finding this content engaging and informative, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you this content. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Now let's move on to the next story. In October 1974, I was a pharmacy student at the University of Utah. I had just had dental surgery and was waiting for the bus to take me back to campus. As I stood there, a young man in a tan Volkswagen pulled up and offered me a ride. His name was Ted, and he seemed friendly, like a fellow college student just helping another out. It felt normal and not out of place, definitely not like hitchhiking. Ted said he was a first-year law student. We started chatting, and it was a pleasant conversation, light-hearted and friendly. He looked the part of a college student, nicely dressed in a green pullover sweater and nice slacks. I felt at ease as we headed toward the university. But there was something strange I noticed right away. The inside passenger door handle was missing. Ted leaned over and pulled the door shut for me. I didn't think much of it. After all, college kids often have cars with little quirks like that. I figured it was no big deal. As we drove, he didn't take the usual road back to the university. I asked him about it, and he politely explained that he had a short errand to run near the zoo. It didn't bother me. He was a cute law student, and the zoo was just one canyon over from the college. I thought I'd still get back to campus faster than if I'd waited for the bus. When he drove past the zoo, I jokingly asked, "I thought you were taking me to the zoo." He responded calmly, saying he had mentioned the errand was near the zoo. Then he pulled the car over and backed into an isolated grove of trees. At first I thought maybe he had romance in mind. I was very wrong. Ted turned in his seat, almost facing me, and leaned in very close. Then, very quietly, he said, "You know what? I'm going to kill you." He put his hands on my throat and started to strangle me. We had a small battle in the car, but I eventually went unconscious. I thought I was going to die right there in the car. But Ted had other plans for me. He revived me and continued his horrific attack for 3 hours. He raped me and strangled me repeatedly until I was unconscious, then revived me and did it again. He was standing over me, slapping my face back and forth, trying to wake me up. As soon as I was conscious, he grabbed me and started hitting me. He was angrier than I had ever seen anyone. His fists were clenched, veins bulging on his forehead and neck, his face bright red. He leaned over me as I cried and begged for my life. He said I didn't have the right to cry and should be thankful to be alive. He said he could kill me anytime he wanted, and that I should be grateful to be breathing. I got the break I needed when Ted was distracted by something near his car. He thought I was dead, and I managed to run into the woods. As soon as I started to run, I realized that my pants were in a wad around my ankles, so I tripped after just 1 or 2 steps. I fell into a fast-moving mountain stream, which swept me away from my attacker and probably saved my life. I got out of the stream and walked through the woods 10 miles back to my home. I was too terrified to return to the road in case Ted came looking for me. I was angry because it was cold, and I was wet and freezing. It was so far to walk. When I got home, my roommates were gone. I got myself cleaned up and vowed that no one would ever know about the horrifying ordeal. I imagined people whispering, "That's the girl who was raped." I also felt guilty for accepting the ride and believed my mother might take me out of school if she ever found out. I felt ashamed and embarrassed and stupid for even getting into such a dangerous situation. Everyone knows you are not supposed to take rides with strangers, and people will think, why did you do that? I was also terrified about the religious implications of coming forward with my story. At the time of the attack, I had been a young Mormon virgin and was worried about how I would be viewed by those in my religion if the rape came to light. The teachings in the LDS Church at that time were that your virtue and chastity are the most important things a young woman can have, and if you come to a point where there's a choice of giving up your chastity or your life, you're probably better off eternally if you die. And I hadn't died, so I had that kind of guilt too about how to justify that with God. Now I was not pure, I was not chaste anymore, and I was not worthy of a nice young man anymore. About a year later, I saw my attacker's face again during a local television news report about a man arrested for the attempted kidnapping of Carol DaRonch. The arrest brought me another wave of guilt, as I realized that I had not been Ted's only victim. It was another proof that it was him. That's the guy. Maybe I should have done something about it. I waited nearly 4 decades to tell my story, so my account cannot be confirmed by law enforcement. However, crime writer Anne Rule wrote in the foreword of my book that my story checks out. Rule, who launched her career as a true crime author with The Stranger Beside Me, which depicted her time working alongside Ted at a Seattle crisis clinic, wrote, "Rhonda Stapley, unlike most of the women who have contacted me about their brushes with Bundy, did not suddenly remember her encounter years after it occurred. She didn't have to try to remember because she had never forgotten. Ted told her his first name, and she had long, terrifying moments to study his face." Rule added that my account is consistent with the FBI's timeline of Bundy's activities in 1974, and that those who knew me vouch for my honesty. Not only is she a credible witness, but her story checks out. In the years after the harrowing ordeal, I got married, became a mother, and embarked on a career as a pharmacist. I thought that I just needed to put it away and make life like it was before, and just pretend it never happened. After decades of pushing the experience away from my mind, my feelings about the attack came to the surface again in 2011 while dealing with a bullying incident at work. I couldn't control my tears, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I thought I was going crazy, but I knew it had to be related to the Bundy stuff, because that's what my dreams and my nightmares and my panic attacks were about. I eventually decided to speak out about the gruesome attack as a way to process my ordeal. I think my experience with Ted Bundy affected every aspect of my life. It changed my level of self-confidence, it changed my trust, even my trust in myself. I became more introverted, less outgoing. By sharing my story, I hope to help other victims of abuse. The main thing I wanted to tell people was that they're not alone. Even though their traumatic experience may be different than my traumatic experience, at least there's someone who can recognize those feelings and people who can understand. It all started on January 15th, 1978. Ted Bundy had managed to escape from a jail in Colorado 2 weeks earlier and was on a rampage. He found his way to the Chi Omega sorority house in Tallahassee. The door was broken, I remember. Bundy saw that and picked up a piece of wood, a log that was by the fireplace. He went through the sorority house and up the stairs. The first room he entered was Margaret Bowman's. He attacked her with that log and beat her badly. Then he went across the hall and did the same thing to Lisa Levy. After that, he came into my room. At that time, I was 20 years old. My friend Karen Chandler and I were asleep in our room when we woke up to the sound of Bundy stumbling over a trunk on the floor. But that noise didn't give us enough time to react. I looked up and saw a shadow standing next to me. Bundy had that log raised high above his head, and then he slammed it down on my face. It was so hard that it shattered my chin and jaw. My cheek was cut open, and you could see the inside of my mouth. Suddenly, the room became bright. A light shone, and I could see Bundy clearly. He looked at himself and started pacing back and forth, looking nervous. Karen and I fought desperately to survive. Meanwhile, a sorority sister was dropped off by her boyfriend. The car headlights illuminated the scene, which scared Bundy enough to make him flee. He turned around in the driveway, and when the room went dark again, I was still curled up in a ball, in terrible pain, waiting for him to come back. We survived that horrific night, but recovering from such trauma was incredibly difficult. I wasn't sure if I would ever fully heal. Despite everything, I agreed to give a deposition in Bundy's case. What I didn't expect was to be in the same room with him during the deposition. When I sat down, I looked up and saw Bundy at the other end of the table, acting like it was no big deal. He was casual, as if saying, "Let's get this over with." Bundy's demeanor was the same during his trial in 1979, where he was sentenced to death. He was executed by electrocution, taking less than 2 minutes to die. I chose not to attend his execution. I had already given him enough of my mental energy. I wasn't going to give him another moment where I faced him or he faced me as he died. I knew he had killed so many women. I heard that he cried and begged not to be killed, saying, "Please don't kill me." Those words must have been similar to what his victim said just before he killed them. I imagined all the beautiful women he had murdered crying, "Please don't kill me." And then he was electrocuted. Though I didn't go to the execution, I watched the news coverage. Seeing the white flag above the prison brought me to tears. As Bundy was executed, I cried for all the 32 women he had killed and mutilated. I thought about Margaret and Lisa, my sorority sisters who suffered and shouldn't have. I cried for them too. My book, A Light in the Dark, Surviving More Than Ted Bundy, tells my story but mainly focuses on who Bundy really was and the women he took from this world. Bundy was known to have killed 32 women and girls across several states between 1974 and 1978, though some believe he might have killed even more. The book aims to show that Bundy was not the charming man people thought he was. He wasn't smart or good, he was simply evil. He killed to collect the souls of his victims. In my book, I talk about each of the 32 women he killed, sharing their dreams, loves, and what mattered to them. I wanted to give them a voice so they wouldn't be forgotten. On the night of January 15th, 1978, I, Cheryl Thomas, a 21-year-old dance major at Florida State University, decided to have a fun night out with my friends. I got all dolled up and headed to a popular disco club in downtown Tallahassee. The club was buzzing with energy, and my friends and I spent the night dancing to the hustle and the bump, enjoying every moment. After a night full of laughter and dancing, we left the club just after midnight. I returned to my off-campus apartment, located near the FSU football stadium. Feeling a bit hungry, I made myself an open-faced peanut butter and honey sandwich. I then settled in front of the television, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Ted Bundy, one of the country's most notorious serial killers, had already bludgeoned 2 women to death at the FSU Chi Omega sorority house. His thirst for violence unquenched, he wandered through the night and found my apartment. Bundy managed to climb into my apartment through a kitchen window. Suddenly, I was face to face with the killer. He had pantyhose over his face, which he quickly removed and dropped on my floor. In a brutal attack, Bundy broke my jaw and severed a nerve leading to my left ear, causing me to lose hearing and experience balance problems. My neighbor, Debbie Ciccarelli, heard the disturbing noises coming from my apartment. She was awakened by loud banging sounds and then heard my moans and whimpers. Concerned, Debbie called me to check on me. Although the walls were thin and Debbie could hear the phone ringing, I was unable to answer. When the police arrived at the scene, they found me lying on the floor, bloody and severely beaten. The prompt actions of my neighbors had saved my life. If I didn't have my neighbors calling, I don't think I would have survived. I woke up a few days later in the hospital with little memory of the attack. My mother, Anne, expressed immense gratitude for my survival, telling the Associated Press in 1989, "Every day of my life, I thank God for her life." The injuries I sustained dashed my dreams of becoming a professional dancer. I never returned to FSU. However, I found a new path in life, teaching ballet and working with the deaf. Despite the trauma and the dreams that were taken from me, I found a way to move forward and make a difference in the lives of others. It was 1977. I had a newborn baby and wasn't working full-time. To help out, my mum hired me and my younger sister to clean and fix furniture at her antique shop while she looked after the baby. One summer day, a handsome young man walked into the shop. He introduced himself as Ted and started chatting with us. He seemed friendly and interested, especially in my sister, who was 17 at the time. He bought a big piece of furniture called an armoire, but he said his truck was too small to take it home. He was only driving a Volkswagen Beetle, an older one at that. Then he surprisingly asked me and my sister out for dinner that night. We were covered in dirt and sweat from work. Plus, I had a hungry baby at home and my sister already had a boyfriend. So, we politely declined. He didn't give up easily, though. He offered to take me for a quick ride to get his truck so he could leave his Beetle at a repair shop. But I really needed to get back to my baby. She was breastfeeding, and I felt like I might start leaking milk any minute. This Ted guy kept trying to convince one of us to go somewhere with him. He even offered to come back later that night to pick up the armoire, hoping we'd be alone. We told him no again. The shop closed at 6, and we both had evening plans. He wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept suggesting other times, even asking if we could meet him really early the next morning. My sister and I started exchanging annoyed looks. This guy was getting creepy. Finally, he said he wouldn't buy the furniture unless we were more flexible with our time. We were a little disappointed to lose the sale, but after 2 hours of him talking and looking around, we just wanted to finish our work and go home. By closing time at 6 p.m., we saw his Beetle parked outside. He tried one last time to get us to go for coffee, especially my sister. We said no again, like we had before, but he wouldn't leave us alone. Feeling uneasy, I told my sister I'd drive her home, even though she had her own car. I just didn't want her to be alone with this guy around. He finally drove off, and we didn't think much more about it until the next year. That's when we saw a picture in the newspaper. Ted Bundy. Just writing about it gives me chills even now. My sister and I talk about it sometimes. We were so lucky that day. If we had gone with him, we could have been the victims of this terrible criminal. If you want to see more of the most frightening horror videos, check out our previous videos and subscribe to be notified of new, terrifying experiences. Until we meet again, be cautious of the supernatural and be careful when navigating through dark and eerie situations.